Good afternoon. I'm Daniel Salter, Head of Research at Renaissance Capital, and I'm accompanied by Charles Robertson, Global Chief Economist. We're delighted to welcome to our 25th Annual Russian Investment Conference, Sergey Ryabkov, Russia's Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs. Minister Ryabkov has a very wide brief, responsible for bilateral relations with North and South America, non-proliferation and arms control, Iran's nuclear program, and Russia's participation in the BRICS Association. He has many decades of experience in foreign policy and beyond. This is not his first time to our conference speaking to investors, and we've always been very, very appreciative of his views and thoughts. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today, Minister.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you here. Now, I'd like to kick off with the US relationship. Our sense coming out of the recent summit between the Russian and US presidents is that the US seems to be willing to put the past behind it to an extent and to move forward with the relationship with Russia. Do you agree with that assessment? And what do you see as the key takeaways from that summit?
Thanks a lot. This is the core question, of course. I hope I would be able to say, yes, this is the case. I'm not in a position to do so as of now. The summit itself transpired in a way that it was possible to achieve some considerable deliverables, especially against the background of a very miserable stance this relationship is in due to several circumstances, mostly due to the very flawed view of Russia in the US and in some other parts of the world. But deliverables were there, not just in the area of strategic stability and cyber, but also in terms of leaders confirming their intention to put behind some of the most weird and unnecessary problems with diplomatic presences in respective capitals, and also agreeing to bring back ambassadors to their places of service. This is very limited in terms of what might be the actual breakthrough in relationship. The tone was businesslike, down to earth, a very pragmatic one in my view, which was good. The leaders were able to send their messages out after the summit in a way that helped, I think, to preserve the core of deliverables. But to your question, it would require several months from now, in my view, to say with a sufficient degree of certainty if at all this summit made a difference in broad sense of the word.
So, you've long been a proponent, I've looked at several of your speeches, of a kind of small steps approach to the bilateral agenda with the US. I mean, where do you think the easiest areas of cooperation are right now? And do you think what we have is sufficient to build from? How should we measure the success in 6 or 12 months? What should we look at to see whether it does seem to be working?
You are exactly right. I am a very strong proponent of small steps approach. We should understate but over-deliver in an ideal world. Otherwise, it would be, once again, yet another circle of mutual disappointment. I don't believe in any ideas like, reset, détente, all the words that, point to some ideas of grandeur character are out of date today, for sure. As our relationship between Moscow and Washington kind of oscillated over the years, ups and downs, the magnitude of this oscillation became dangerously huge in recent years. So we need to do something about prevention of dangerous military activity, de-escalation, avoidance of dangerous incidents. Those are areas of prior focus, and very recently, well, I would say before the summit, still it was close to the summit, we had a regular meeting of military experts talking on the implementation of bilateral agreement dated back to 1972 on avoidance of such incidents. And Russia strongly favors improvement of this agreement and modernizing this agreement. We call our US colleagues to be serious about it. This is just an example of what should be done. In the very opposite side of this span of problems, I would say we have a number of very resound humanitarian cases where some names of the people resonate badly in general public, both in US and Russia. We should do something about it. And Russia has made its proposals known to the US side on what to do. Cyber and ICT security might be an area of obvious interest and the need for our two countries to engage proactively into. But because of extremely politicized character of some issues associated with this, I wouldn't say that it is a small step kind of area, an area prone to the small step approach. Rather, it's a quite demanding and challenging area for our effort. So improvement of the operation circumstances, operational environment of our embassies and consulate generals, improvement in the area of visa issuance where we do not have any movement whatsoever. We have half dozen of issues that may constitute this small step agenda, and we favor this. We want to follow up the summit with the bilateral consultations at the level of experts and senior officials as well, sooner rather than later, in anticipation that instructions would be implemented and the initial steps would be followed by something that may be more impressive compared to what we have right now.
If I could jump in on the issue of the cyber crime, I mean, from our angle and in terms of what our investors care about, they hate being taken by surprise. The sanctions that we got some months ago, which had dated back for a number of years over a number of issues, that wasn't a great surprise to the investor community. But when we get this cyber attack, and I don't think the US government is blaming the Russian government, but is thinking it's private sector criminal gangs perhaps operating in Russia, that represents a negative surprise, which makes it hard for investors to price. You know, how bad could relationships get over issues like this? Or the question I'd put to you is, what can Russia do to try and make America feel less worried about it, to try and improve relations on the two sides on the cybercrime issue? I'm not saying it is all one way, by the way. I'm just saying, you know, in terms of stress from the US acting towards Russia, what can Russia do on that issue?
Well, investors make their own choices. It goes without saying that they calculate in a way that is very different from the way how governments and politicians do the same. And I have full respect with it. From my perspective, we have been able to establish a very thorough and down-to-earth exchange with the US side on these issues, and one of the major areas where the leaders were able to talk in a way that opens up for possible further communication and hopefully also interaction. This happened exactly in Geneva, which was an important element of the overall picture created there. We are in no way rejecting the severity of the problems that may have a relation to criminal activities in this area. We do not think that there might be such thing as impunity with respect to individuals that may eventually perform such actions. Having said that, I would also need to say immediately with the same token that the only way to achieve it is through proper bilateral cooperation with due involvement of all the agencies from both sides. Otherwise, it will end up as it usually ends in our interaction with the US on many issues. That is, US claims something, gives no evidence to support this, and it just fades out. That would be very unfortunate and very troubling. The US side gave the Russian side at this summit a list of different elements of both infrastructure and broader social fabric that, in the view of the US, require particular vigilance in terms of non-acceptance by the US side of any malign cyber activitis, and we take this very seriously. But likewise, we want from the US to be serious about our complaints. I would hate to produce the litany of complaints here before you, and that's not the point, that's not the purpose. But just the fact of the matter is that the US usually doesn't respond to any of the Russian requests to provide some information on possible malicious cyber activities on Russia, Russian entities and Russian individuals. We have dozens of such cases last year alone, and it was very, very few of them that were responded to by the US. This should be improved. Another aspect of it is, with all the importance the US side attaches to the criminal activity of this in this cyber domain, we would definitely stay very firm on the idea that the dialogue should be broader than that. We should talk on other aspects of ICT securities. We should talk on issues how our respective military doctrines, as they evolve, cover this area, because we saw in recent years in the US tendencies towards, covering the cyber ground, ICT-related ground, as a fighting field, as an area where offensive operations of military character are allowed. And in recent days, we saw such signals coming out from Washington already after the summit was over. All this is troubling, and we need to cover full spectrum of issues, exactly as Putin proposed to the US side when he issued his statement of September 29 last year.
Yeah, I'm very interested in this theme about rebuilding communications and understanding between Russia and different countries. And, you mentioned earlier the idea about visas, and could it become easier for people to visit Russia and for Russians to visit other countries? I mean, certainly at the moment, it's quite difficult for Russians to get visas to the US, and vice versa. In fact, it's quite an administrative process. Russia, I know, has a very strong focus at the moment on developing its tourism business. At the moment, that focus is domestically, because it's quite difficult for people to travel internationally, given the restrictions. But as the world reopens, might Russia choose to help diversify its economy by promoting a more liberal tourism visa regime, or does it only react to others moving at the same time? So is this a bilateral thing, or could Russia unilaterally make it more easy for people to visit?
It's both. It's both, very truly so. We had excellent experience of something that was quite unique. In recent years, we have introduced almost a visa-free entry into Russia through the arrangement which is widely known as a soccer fan pass. At the World Cup in 2018, we had dozens of thousands of people coming to the country on this. We have several areas in Russia where people coming, for instance, on cruise ships, are allowed to enter the country, and even in case of St. Petersburg, to travel to Moscow for one night stay in Moscow or something, through issuance of electronic visas for them, which is an easy arrangement and quite cheap I would say. This is one thing. Another one is that we gradually move towards establishment of bilateral visa-free travel arrangements for 90 days with a number of countries around. And this number grows. And since I'm doing formally our relations with Latin America, with South America, I cannot but mention that almost whole of this huge, vast region, including South America, Central America, and much of the Caribbean, is now a visa-free travel area for Russian citizens and vice versa.
Wow.
Of course, if people come to Russia to take the job, to stay here for studies, for getting education and other things, there are different arrangements in this area. Some say they're quite cumbersome. Others say that, you know, the room for improvement is not exhausted, but they are quite understandable ones. We measure the requirements of different sort, including the requirements to protect the labor market in a way that improves possibilities for the locals to take jobs, and also to draw expats that are, because of their professions, because of their education and their experience, that they could, you know, be very welcome at different positions in our economy and elsewhere in infrastructure, to draw them to the Russian market and bring them to Russia. And this is a delicate balancing act which the government tries to figure out how to resolve. I'm sure you are very aware that the Foreign Ministry, as a governmental agency, is among those who promote visa-free travel and further facilitation of visa requirements and other requirements in this area. And we intend to do so. We will work further to move things down this road as epidemiological situation allows and as situation improves altogether in international travel in general.
That would be great. I lived for 10 years in Moscow, and I can say that one night visa-free in Moscow is probably not enough. You could spend many, many months exploring Moscow and, of course, Russia as a whole. Charlie?
Yeah, I've been, I was watching the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, and what struck me out of those speeches was the shift on the environment that I've seen over the last few years in Russia's thinking. It was an issue that wasn't talked about often 5 years ago, but it felt like it was a very significant part of the agenda. And you've got the COP26 summit later this year. I was just, as you were in charge of the BRICS kind of cooperation, among the things I was looking at was this issue of forests and investment into forestry and agriculture, which I imagine Brazil would probably be thinking about as well. And I wondered about whether China could be playing a role in that investment into the environmental space in terms of forests and agriculture investments in Russia. But I was just wondering, are you going to be taking a common agenda with the BRICS, with Brazil in particular, on this forest issue to that summit in Glasgow and saying, we should be thinking about carbon absorption. We need to be thinking about forests and what they can do to reduce climate change risks. Is that something you're working with these other countries on? And what is Russia's, I mean, I guess it'd be lovely to hear from you about how you see the agenda on the environmental side.
Indeed, you know, let me say something different at first instance, though. When Putin spoke at the first major VCR event arranged by the US upon arrival of President Biden, he made some very significant statements, both in terms of political observations, but also of a very specific character in terms of committing Russia to some goals which are, I would say, in sync with quite ambitious agendas that UK, European Union, US itself produces and follows. Our presidential special envoy on climate changes, Mr. Edelgiriyev, was able to communicate directly with Secretary Kerry in his new capacity, and I am sure this interaction will continue as we move closer forward to the event of the year, which is the Glasgow Global Conference on Climate Change in November. I switch now into BRICS. I would tell you that over years, an environmental agenda at BRICS gains more and more attention and also more and more importance, both in terms of, I would say, megabytes of final communiques and deliberations covering this issue, but more important of this agenda becoming more sophisticated and more complex and comprehensive, if you wish. Speaking specifically on forests, I do recognize that this is an area which draws a lot of attention because of particular nuances which we all know in particular places. But nonetheless, the role of forests in carbon sinking and in overall attitudes of the international community to the need to exhaust all the opportunities before us in order to make sure that we stay within the limits as agreed and as spelled out internationally. This is before us as an area of prior focus. I think that the Brazilian government over years, or Brazilian governments over years, were at the driving seat at BRICS in terms of developing environmental agendas. Coming back to the years where they were specifically focused on biofuel and changes of particular aspects of agricultural production into, switch over to alternatives to the standard old-fashioned hydrocarbons. Now it's somewhat different, and it's all about renewables. And Russia here stands for a very thoughtful and deliberate approach to the proper mix between hydrocarbons and renewables, where we do not think it would be right just to brush off nuclear or hydro or other areas where Russia traditionally was a strong player and still is. So BRICS is within all these areas, and I'm sure later this year, when we will see the next BRICS summit this year under the Indian chairship, further additional commitments of a multilateral, pentalateral rather, character will come up. Otherwise, it would not be possible to maintain the relevance which BRICS was able to acquire within a historically very short period of time. Remember, it's no more than 12 years old, this association. And everyone within BRICS is interested in both maintenance of the grouping, but also expansion of the scope in which this grouping is active. Some people say that there are growing difficulties and differences within BRICS, and I wouldn't underestimate the need for us at BRICS to focusedly work on some of those, and I am very sure that with the necessary political will invested into it, we would be very able and capable to put those behind. And BRICS, and this is the strongest aspect about BRICS, is never contra anything. It's always a pro approach on everything. There is no such thing as a hidden agenda in BRICS, and Russia working through two cycles of its chairship already, managed, in my view, to show that we have here an inviting set of procedural approaches, but also agenda that is modern and thoroughly thought through. So BRICS doesn't require further advertisement. The very scope of activities in all three major areas where BRICS is growing and is known for speak for itself.
I was thinking Canada is also probably one of your key allies when it comes to this. It should be when it comes to this forest issue, because I think Canada and Russia and Brazil are by far the biggest owners of forests in the world. But I did want to ask a second question connected to the BRICS, which is about this IMF special drawing rights increase. So when COVID hit last year, there was this sense of what could the wealthier countries do for the rest of the world. And it's taken a while, but the IMF special drawing rights expansion is coming maybe in August. And then there's this talk led by Macron, who's pushed the agenda out of France, of the richer countries, the wealthier countries, giving up some of their allocation of special drawing rights and handing that on to further help the lower income countries who don't get very much in August from this proposal, but maybe they will if France allocates its money, and maybe the UK. I read the other day that China's thinking about it, or is prepared to consider. I think it gets something like $40 billion from the special drawing rights increase. It might do something with that allocation. Russia, I think, gets at least 20 billion, heading on towards 30 billion. I'm just curious whether there could be some cooperation on the BRICS side about how to address this sort of what to do with the IMF special drawing rights increase.
We are very, very open for further discussion on this and further debate on this. I do recognize that there might be areas where BRICS participating states do not necessarily look eye for eye on these issues, but it's undeniable that the need for the international community to do more in terms of assisting countries with lowest income, and also to do more in terms of assisting a sustainable growth at levels that would bring the world economy out of last year's shock sooner rather than later, that this need is recognized by everyone. We used to have specialized formats for intra-BRICS exchanges, dialogue, and eventual coordination even on the Bretton Woods agenda. Earlier, there was a particular area of our focused interest as BRICS, and that was a reform of national quotas, which moves forward pretty slowly in our view, but so we cannot change the world around ourselves, especially not overnightly, but we will persevere here. On special drawing rights, I know for sure that this is an area that attaches considerable attention on the part of our Ministry of Finance and other agencies that are directly engaged into it. We do not, reject any of the ideas. The problem would be just to find the right way to go. And as ever on such issues, there might be some, I would say, overly far-reaching attitudes and approaches, something that is more conservative and less effective. We should find something in between, and Russia would be very ready to continue exchanges both within BRICS. Hopefully we would be able to do so as BRICS, but I don't know if it is feasible, but also in direct contact with IMF.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that answer.
So one other item on your very large table is Iran. Maybe you could give us 2 or 3 minutes of where we are now in the negotiations. We had the elections recently. We had a recent round of meetings in Vienna. What's your assessment of where we stand?
Currently, there is a break in Vienna. The 6th round is over, and if we measure where we are in terms of how diplomats were able to remove brackets and agree on particular language, we have reached a stage very close to a final push. That's not an exaggeration, but as ever, the final inch is the hardest one to cover, and all the major political decisions should be taken in capitals. These days, there is always an attempt by any delegation at negotiating table to squeeze everything what is possible out of the current situation until the very last moment. But differently from some other negotiations where I was present, currently we have a reasonably good understanding of a sketch of the overall final outcome. And it is almost just about a political decision or political decisions to be taken in respective capitals to which we call them for. And it relates both to US and Iran. There are some areas where the US should, in our view, show a measure of additional flexibility. The Iranians should be, in our view, less ambitious on some political aspects of this overall posturing. And then, as we have been able to prove before, the six-party talks format, although with the US this time is just proximity talks, but so what? We have been able, not least because of a very thoughtful and proactive approach of the European External Action Service that coordinates the effort, we have been able to reach this almost finished kind of stage. So I am reasonably optimistic. I would say that in my view it will take, of course it will not take months, it may take weeks, but if all the necessary decisions are taken and the final push is arrived at in Vienna, then technically speaking, it would be possible to finish all this within days. So we will continuously work to this end. And as I said, the small steps approach can be applied many places. This is one of the areas where we should deliver.
If I could ask, I like to try and keep as many things simple in my mind as possible. Not quite Steve Jobs, who always wore the same black polo neck top every day so that he didn't have to think. But is the simplest way to think about this new deal with Iran as it brings us back to where we were before Trump? Or is there going to be significant difference that we in the markets might need to pay attention to? I mean, can I be lazy about this and think it's about trying to restore the status quo from 5 years ago, or do I have to read another treaty?
It will be a restoration of a status quo ante as of 2018, before Trump departed. But the question which remains to be answered is what what's next and what is the degree of commitment of all parties involved to do this next. So this is both, formally speaking, it's a return back to the original JCPOA, but then also an opening for something that would follow. This is exactly where we are.
What sort of that status quo back then was good enough pre-2018. It was good enough for Renaissance Capital to be looking into Iran about the potential for investment if global investors might start to put money there, like Total did. We did start looking. That's good enough potentially for investors to start thinking again about the country and to get a bit calmer. So where are you thinking this could go?
I'm not supposed to talk on what exactly transpires at negotiating table, but speaking generically and trying to give a picture with the broad strokes, I would say that re-establishment of the original JCPOA, and that is removal of the bulk of the US sanctions, would not be the end in itself. And further diplomatic efforts might follow if we are lucky in terms of our current negotiating efforts.
It'd be nice to see. It'd be nice to see some improvement in a problem area that's been such a problem for so many decades. That would be great. I think I'm complete.
All right.
Okay.
I don't know whether we have any questions or no extra questions. Thank you.
I think we're up to our 40 minutes allotted time. Thank you very much indeed. Once again, Minister Ryabkov, for joining us. All of us, the audience included, Charlie and myself, really appreciated and enjoyed hearing your thoughts on a very wide range of topics. We really appreciate that. It's very important for both investors and ourselves to maintain this open dialogue. Thank you for your time today in doing that. And we hope very much to be back in person, live in Moscow next year. And we'd like to invite you to come to our conference once more, if you're available then. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's hope so. I will be delighted. Thank you for your time, and thank you for having me once again. Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.
Knowledge is information, but not all information turns into knowledge. Today, every company leaves digital footprints in hundreds of different sources. But this information by itself does not tell you who it is you're looking at and what the risks of doing business with them are. Businesses can't exist in a vacuum. They need employees, customers, partners, contractors, investors. Good counteragents help a company succeed, create products, make profit, expand business opportunities. But what about bad ones? 49% of organizations around the world say that they've been victims of fraud or economic crime. 2/3 of Russian companies say they've encountered economic crime in the past 2 years. This is significantly higher than the global average. Every year, 15% of companies simply disappear, whether on their own initiative or because they're forced to do so by tax bodies, often leaving unpaid debts. If you want to minimize your risk, you need to find and analyze every scrap of information you can, identifying, analyzing, collecting facts. Processing big data is impossible without qualified specialists, experience, time, expensive equipment, new technology, machine learning, graphs. Spark Interfax gathers information from all available sources and converts it into knowledge, allowing you to see the world of business in its entirety with all its risks and opportunities. And there's no doubt that tomorrow we'll be able to understand the world of business even better, thanks to the emerging digital economy, cutting-edge technology, and the availability of new information about the lives of companies. Knowledge decreases risks and creates trust, the foundation of any successful business.